The final reason that we often hear for adopting a vegan diet, and it's probably the most important reason for teens and college kids, is the growing understanding that animals aren't automatons, that animals feel pain in the same way that we do. In fact, it's this realization that animals aren't automatons that forms the basis of the modern animal rights movement. Before I came to PeTA, I spent 6 years working in a shelter for homeless families and helping to run a soup kitchen in Washington, D.C. While I was there, a friend of mine sent me a book by a theologian at Oxford University by the name of Dr. Andrew Lindsay. Lindsay argues that animals were designed with certain needs, desires, species-specific behaviors, and certain inclinations. And he argues that animals have the capacity for pain and suffering, just like human beings do. From Dr. Lindsay's perspective, denying animals the ability to do the things they were designed to do and inflicting pain on them for reasons of convenience, Lindsay argues that these things are categorically unethical. Basically, Lindsay's is the animal rights perspective. The animal rights perspective holds that animals have a right, just like human beings do, to be free from pain and suffering. Back in the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham, who's the father of the utilitarian movement, Bentham stated that if we're talking about a being's right to be free from pain and suffering, the morally relevant variable is not whether that being can think or talk or how we relate to that being. The morally relevant variable is his or her capacity to feel pain, his or her capacity to suffer. Of course, any introductory physiology course will teach you that birds, mammals, and fish have basically the same capacity to suffer. We share this capacity with all animals. Alice Walker, the civil rights activist and humanitarian who wrote The Color Purple and Possessing the Secret of Joy, among many other novels, she wrote the introduction to a book titled The Dreaded Comparison by an author named Marjorie Spiegel. In The Dreaded Comparison, Spiegel compares the treatment of human slaves in the 16th through 19th centuries to the way that animals are treated today. Alice Walker agrees with this analysis, saying, quote, "The animals of the world were not made for humans any more than black people were made for whites or women were created for men." That's really quite a statement. The animals of the world were not made for humans any more than black people were made for whites or women were created for men. The animal rights movement, then, it's a movement for justice, just like abolition, suffrage, civil rights, women's rights. Most people today understand that bias on the basis of race or gender or religion or nationality, that any bias against other human beings, most people understand that those biases are wrong. The neglected link for many people is species bias, having the idea that just because certain beings aren't human beings, we can do whatever we want with them. Dr. Albert Schweitzer put it well when he stated that compassion, in which all ethics must take root, can only attain its full breadth and depth if it embraces all living creatures and doesn't limit itself to humankind. Again, prejudice is prejudice, whether it's based on race or gender or religion, and it's still prejudice if it's based on species. In each of these cases, a line is drawn that separates those in the group above the line from those in the group below the line. Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer, who fled Nazi-occupied Poland and wrote about it in his novels, he called species bias the purest form of racism, and he called animal rights the purest form of justice advocacy, because animals are the most vulnerable of all the downtrodden. Singer felt that mistreating animals is the epitome of the might makes right moral paradigm, and that's a moral paradigm that is ethically bankrupt. Interestingly, the animal rights perspective, it's been embraced by a range of brilliant thinkers and humanitarians that includes, in addition to those I've just mentioned, it includes Pythagoras, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Harriet Beecher Stowe, C.S. Lewis, Susan B. Anthony, Leo Tolstoy, Dick Gregory, and Mahatma Gandhi. Albert Einstein said that nothing would benefit humanity more than the general adoption of a vegetarian diet. Leo Tolstoy stated that vegetarianism is the taproot of humanitarianism. Their point, as they elaborated in their essays, is that eating is essential to who we are. Now, there's a lot of suffering in the world. There are a lot of problems. Solutions are going to require time and devotion from people of goodwill. But if every time we sit down to eat, we choose to support animal abuse, unjust human relationships, and environmental degradation, what does that say about our integrity, about our commitment to other issues of social justice? Again, according to Tolstoy, vegetarianism is the taproot of humanitarianism. It's interesting to recall that slavery on this continent flourished from the 1520s until the mid-1860s with the passage of the 13th Amendment. Women weren't given the right to vote in the United States until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Many people listening probably have relatives who were alive when there was a spirited debate in Congress about whether the Union would dissolve if these irrational creatures, now that's women, if these irrational creatures were given a say in governance. 100 years ago, there wasn't a single law against child abuse in this country. Not one. Your child was your property. Now, also 100 years ago, there wasn't a single country on the planet that guaranteed the vote to all adults. And it's remarkable to recall that just 350 years ago, the Pope sentenced Galileo to the torture chamber until he would recant the heresy that the Earth is not the center of the physical universe. So for a bit of historical perspective here, let's recall that Socrates was teaching 2,600 years ago. Plato and Aristotle were philosophizing 2,500 years ago. Jesus was preaching 2,000 years ago, and Shakespeare was writing fully 500 years ago. And we just got around to saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't hold slaves, and maybe people shouldn't be free to beat their children, and maybe women are rational enough to be given a say in governance. We just got around to all of this fewer than 150 years ago. I mention all this not to give a history lesson, but really just to point out how quickly things can change. Not that long ago, a mere historical blink of an eye, really, society believed with complete certainty the diametrical opposite of what we believe, and with equal certainty, to be true about many things today. Really, just look at how far animal rights has come in historically no time at all. In just the past 20 years, science has shown that a vegan diet is the healthiest, and environmental researchers have proved that eating meat, dairy products, and eggs is not sustainable. And even more importantly, the scientific view that animals don't feel emotion, that's been replaced by a new, albeit belated understanding that of course they do. In just the past few years, the issue of animal treatment on factory farms has taken center stage, with the U.S. Congress decrying slaughterhouse treatment of animals, the fast food giants and major grocery chains making some improvements, and the Washington Post running front-page exposés on some of the worst routine abuses. All of this means that 1 million people a year are making the switch to a vegetarian diet, and food makers have taken notice. Silk brand soy milk is in every grocery store in the country, and even shows like 2020 are proving in blind taste tests that people like it better than cow's milk. Chains like Johnny Rockets and Ruby Tuesday are selling fabulous veggie burgers across the country. Veggie wraps and gourmet salads, they're more popular than ever